almost cut my hair.
So we're going to be going to this website for programming. You can see here.
Alright, so you can speak as loud as you want because that's recorded.
Yeah. Yeah, you can go with that for now. Okay. So once you get to that website, you should see something similar to what's on the smartboard over there. So here's where we're going to be writing our program. So now how to create variables. Most of you should, right? We're going to write a simple program that will take two numbers and add them. So first we'll create two numbers, A and B. We'll create two integers, A and B, and they will be any two numbers you want. We'll add the two numbers, and then we'll write it to the screen. Okay, so yes, Theodore, you have a question? Okay, so does anyone want to remind us how to do this first step? Okay, so we're going to be doing this within the main function, and that is the third line that you can see over there, or the third line here. It says so between the two curly brackets for the main function, this is where we're going to be running our code. So we're going to create two integers, A and B, by first you write the type and then the name of the variable, and then you can assign using the equal sign. So does anyone want to give an example? I think you want to give an example.
Like integer int, and then
Okay.
whichever you want, and then equals to.
Okay, what's my name?
Well, using your example, you can say my integer.
Okay.
Can it be anything?
Sure.
10.
So my integer is 10. What do I add at the end?
But like the semicolon.
Yes, the semicolon. Okay, so now if I'm going to be adding a number to this, I need to have a second number. So Theodore, I think you want to give an example. Another integer. What?
What did you call? What's your integer called? Name whatever you want.
Give me a name.
Bob.
Okay, we'll have Bob. And this will also be an integer. Okay, and what is Bob? So now we're going to make a temporary variable to store the sum of a and b. So that will be a plus b. So what do you want this integer to be called? What do you want the sum to be called?
Amar.
Okay. So how do I do the sum of my integer and Bob? Do you want to answer? Looking Theodore? Yes. I'll write it down here because there's the computer there. And then how do I end the line? Semicolon. Okay, and then you can use this line here to write to the window at the bottom. So in here, you just put the name of whatever you want to print to the console. So in this case, we'd want to print the sum, or whatever you named it, to the console, in which case you just put that name in here. So you just put the name of whatever you want to print to the console. Yeah, in here, between these two parentheses.
So you would put
Yeah. So we'll be getting into this in the next lesson, but this is what is called a function, and it's pretty similar to functions in math in that they take an input. So in math you might have something like sine of x. In this case, instead of inputting x, we're inputting whatever our sum is. And this will just take whatever you give it and show it to you. This is a function, and it works similarly to functions in math, where you give it an input. In the case of something like sine, you'd give it x or pi or whatever. And in the case of right line, you give it whatever you want it to show to you. So if you want it to show you the value of your sum, you'd put right line the sum, and then it will tell you what the sum is.
But like, what's the point of doing this in the law?
What?
It's to make sure, like, you want to tell the console to show something, but what are you going to tell it to show? So you make the third integer, right?
Yes.
You make the third integer to tell it, oh, you're going to be showing this thing, the sum of more.
Okay. Why does it have to be a sum? Why can't it just be, why can't you put like my integer in there?
So you want to show like my integer plus Bob? Like this? You can't.
Or wait, do you have to put a sum in there, or can it be just one integer?
It could be any. So if you were to put just my integer in here, it would show you 10. If you were to put just Bob in there, it would show you 5.
So what
And if you put the sum, it would show you 15, because we said that the sum is the sum of these two.
What is?
Yeah. So you could also skip creating this sum variable and just put console.writeLine of my integer. And you could do it like that, but like Devin has written. But
Still run, when I hit the run button, it runs whatever I wrote, the code. It still gives me 15. I can also write it as the sum of more, which is the
you can get rid of my name.
And it'll still give me 15 because I'm just adding it.
Why not just write right line in the parentheses 10 plus 5?
Okay, so the point of the variable is that these numbers can change. So if I wanted whoever's using the program to type in the numbers after you run it, then you could ask the user for input, in which case you wouldn't have to rewrite your program every time you wanted someone else to use it. So if this number was coming from, say, a file, then I wouldn't have to recompile my program every single time. It would read the file, store that into this number, and then add the two. You look like you're... Oh, God. Okay. So does anyone have any problems with that? No?
How do you run it? How do you get it to 15?
Oh, you forgot.
So you need to have
yes. So every curly bracket like this must have a closing curly bracket. This shows you, like, it creates what's called a nested structure, where everything that is over here between these two brackets is part of this.
Is it going to say 15 anywhere?
Yeah, when you hit the
15.
run.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Oh, you have to include console.writeLine.
oh, okay. Basically, you've calculated the value, but you haven't told it, tell me what that value is.
So you have to
That's
write
what that one does.
Do I have to constantly use the sum of Amar against the show again? Because I have to do that in order to run it.
You can write just the sum. You can change the name. Oh, God.
Because when I did it without the line, it would still give me 15 instead of 29. So I wrote it back again, and I had to get the 3 different numbers.
Okay. Now, there's one important thing to note, and that is lines are run sequentially. So first the computer will run this line. This is the first line executed. Then it runs this line, so that's the second line executed. And then it runs this line, so that's the third line executed. So if somewhere else, say down here, I were to say Bob equals 6. Now Bob is 6. My integer is still 10, but the sum is 15. Because in this line, we found that the sum is this number plus this number, which is 15, and then Bob was changed after the fact.
Do you have to, where do you put it that it's changed?
What?
Like, where do you input the new Bob?
We're saying this is the fourth line.
Because if you
So we have
change
these
a
three.
variable, you can change it like anywhere in your code.
Yes.
But because you changed Bob, you changed it after you defined what the sum or the sum of Amar is.
So do you go back to int Bob and int 6?
So this is perfectly acceptable because if we were to say these were points in time, at 1 second my integer is 10, at 2 seconds Bob is 5.
So just to change it, you just have to write Bob equals 6, just the new one?
So later on you can change the value of a variable. It's called a variable because its value can change. So if we were to later change Bob to 6, the sum, you would think that it would change to 16, which would be my integer, which is 10, plus Bob, which is 6. But in fact, it's still 15. And that's because at time equals 3, or the third line, we said that it was whatever the current value of my integer, which is 10, plus whatever the current value of Bob is, which is 5, which is 15. And that is, this 15
But
is stored
what if you rewrote
into.
that on the bottom after 6?
If you were to do this after this line,
Yeah.
then it would be 16.
Okay. What if you went back to the second step and changed it to 6?
If we were to
Yeah, if you changed
do
it to
that,
6, would 3 change?
then this would show 16. The only thing is, you can't change it while the program is running. You can only change it before you run the program.
How do you know that's right?
When you click run, it will compile the code, and that will take all your code that you've written and turn it into an executable, which is like that thing that you double click on your desktop. And then when you double click that, it's running. I kind of don't know how to describe it because it's kind of abstract.
Oh, like when it's running?
Yeah.
How do you know when it's like how to stop?
When the code stops.
Okay.
Like if you get like 15, does
yeah.
that mean it stopped?
Yes.
Okay.
You can see in the bottom right, it tells you how long the code took to run. So right next to CPU or execute, that is how long it took for the program to run. So 0.016. Why are you looking at me like that? Yes.
So I see on the bottom you didn't specify Bob is an integer, so do you have to specify it's an integer for the purpose of adding it?
Okay, no. You only have to specify that Bob is an integer when you declare it. So declaration is when you say, when you create a new variable. So you would declare, say, int my int. And then you could end the line there. And then assignment is where you say, and that's assigning the value 6 to my int. And so any further lines, you don't need to say that it's an int. Okay, let's move on. Do any of you have any questions?
Can I take a picture?
Yes.
Let's go ahead and take a picture.
Do you have any questions? Kelly, do you have any questions? Okay. Next, we'll move on to something harder. So we'll write a program to find the roots of a polynomial.
For your calculator kind of stuff? Or in C#, basically?
Yeah. So we'll do the quadratic formula. Did you take the picture?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Okay, so we'll start with the quadratic formula, which is here x equals Okay, so here's our quadratic formula. Yes?
Did you sing the song in your head while you were writing?
Yes, I did. Kill yourself. What?
I look like a 5.
You look like a 5. Okay, so these are our 2 roots. So we can write this using parentheses to make it easier to find our 2 roots and like to write it in our code. So we can put parentheses
Do you keep this as a integer or a float?
we will use a float value because this might be a decimal number or a fraction, and so it will be easier to calculate the value without error. Okay, so we'll break this down. What are you laughing at?
I don't know.
Okay, we'll break this down into how we are going to write this in the code. So we'll create 3 integers. I guess I'll write it how you would. This is where
So we're giving the variable values.
yeah, we'll just use 1, 0, and -1 for an example. That would be x squared minus 1. Yes. So we're going to write a calculator that will calculate our
Does like
roots.
programming like what like
You have to program a calculator.
okay.
Have you
Actually-
ever used the app on your calculator to calculate all your signals?
It
Have you
would.
ever seen that it always asks you for A, B, and C?
This is what it's doing.
Yeah. This is, we're going to be writing what it's doing.
So, if we have our, or actually, they'd be floats. We have our 3 floats, and we're going to convert this into our, yes?
I wasn't here. What's the difference between a float and an integer?
A float can hold decimal numbers like 1.2, whereas an integer can only hold whole numbers like 1.
Why would you why do you have to like declare that?
Okay, we're using floats because once we do these calculations, it might have decimals in it, and so forgot what it is.
Do you have to put in the quadratic equation or do you just put float?
We just put float here because it's a type similar to int.
Before, do you put in the quadratic equation here? Like, before you put, like, variables, do you have to put the quadratic equation?
No, we're going to be figuring out how to put this in code. This is just this rewritten.
Okay.
So we have float A is 1f, float B is 0f, and float C is negative 1f. Okay. And so
Do you have to put spaces in between?
you don't have to put spaces, but you should because it'll make it easier to read.
Okay.
Yes?
I don't see the square root button on the keyboard.
We're going to get to that. Okay, so now we're going to look at the quadratic equation, and you see that over here we have the plus and minus, and that means that we're going to take this part, which is called the discriminant, and add it to negative b, and then we'll also, for our second root, subtract it from negative b. To make this easier for us, we can find the discriminant once. So that would be another float. And I will call it discrim. And that will be just the square root part of our equation. So now we need to know how to do square roots. There's a function in the math class called math.sqrt. And so this is our square root function. And then in here you put okay, and so in actuality this is a double, which is the bigger float. So in front we'll have to use our cast to turn it into a float.
Is that just like the thing for the square root? It's not the b squared? You have to put b squared inside the parentheses?
Yeah, over here we're going to have to do our this part.
Because whatever happens here, I'll show you.
What did you square?
Okay, there's no square symbol, so you can just do b times b.
Amar, is all functions of math doubles?
Yes,
Yeah, that's right.
they're all doubles. What did I do?
Amar, don't you just put all spaces in between the variables?
You don't need to. That is... Okay, I can just get rid of this one then. So we put b times b minus 4 times a times c. So b times b is b squared, because there's no square symbol. And you subtract 4 times a times c, which is this part. E. What? Oh, the asterisk sharply. So.
And increases my paranoia. Like looking at my mirror and seeing a police car. But I'm not giving in and in.